Welcome to our online U.S. history class at Downey High School. Today, we are going to be talking about the process of composing the Constitution and the process of ratifying it, which means passing the Constitution. So you can see here, this is a drawing of the Constitutional Convention. By way of review, if you remember, we talked about how the first government of the United States, called the Articles of Confederation, failed because it was too weak. After Shays' Rebellion, everybody was like, this thing does not work. We don't have an army. We can't put the rebellion down. And they decided to meet to amend the Articles. They very quickly realized the Articles was inherently too weak and they needed to just throw it out and start over. So this group of a lot of white middle-aged men are going to compose the Constitution. You can see George Washington pictured at the front. He's going to head up this meeting in Philadelphia. Okay, so in order to get this Constitution, we need to resolve some conflicts between different kinds of states. So the main conflicts are going to be between big states and small states, though they're going to have different interests in how they're represented in Congress. So a state like Pennsylvania or New York, they're going to want to have more say in the laws than, say, Rhode Island. You can see those pictured down there. Rhode Island is a really tiny state, but Rhode Island wants to make sure that they don't just get consistently outvoted. So that's going to be an issue, big states and small states. The other big conflict is between slave and free states. You can see below the picture that shows which states are free by this point and which ones are slave. You'll notice there are actually some slave states in the North. There's a common misconception those were always in the South, and that's not true. Slavery actually started everywhere in the colonies and then slowly became outlawed in the North. So the slave states definitely outnumber the free states in this convention, and we're going to have to figure out how to resolve that issue. Okay, so to make this work, the Constitution has three major compromises that we are going to talk about. So the first one is called the Great Compromise, where we're deciding how representation should be done in Congress. So you can see on the screen, the question is, should representation be decided based on population or based on equality for states? Okay, so that basically means, should you get more votes if your state has more people, or should all of the states count the same? Every state has the same amount of votes. Okay, so if I am a large populous state, which way would I want that to go? Okay, if you said a large state would want it to be by population, you're right? Like California is like, hey, we got a lot more people than Alaska. We should get a lot more votes in Congress. Okay, however, if you are a small state, how do you want this to be determined? That's right, by all of the states being equal, because the reality is if California gets 53 votes and Montana gets 1, they're going to be outvoted every time. So why should they even join, right? And so what we decide on is a compromise. We actually have 2 houses in Congress, and you can see, look at that picture at the bottom. That is the Capitol building. So if you go to Washington, D.C., you can check this out. And on one side, there's the Senate. The other side is the House of Representatives. And this is what we call a bicameral or 2-house legislature. So the way we resolve this is we give both states what they want. Large states are happy because they have the House of Representatives, which is based on population. And as I referenced earlier, in the House, California has the most votes because we have the most people. We have 53 votes in the House, and Alaska has 1 because they have caribou, not people, right? So that's how it works in the House. The more people you have, the more votes you get. In the Senate, there is equal representation. So every state gets 2 votes, no matter how many people you have, and that helps keep Montana and Alaska happy because their vote actually does mean something. So you can see here, these are pictured, the interior of the Capitol building. These are the 2 chambers. So I want you to take a picture and take a look at the pictures and guess, which one do you think is the House? Okay, if you said the top left, you would be correct. The House of Representatives has 435 people in it, so it is much larger. And those representatives represent a much smaller segment of the population. They only represent a district. If you look in the bottom right, you can see that is the Senate chamber, which is much smaller. Remember, there's 50 states, 2 votes per state. Who can do math? That's right, 100 people. Okay, so there's only 100 people in the Senate as opposed to 435 in the House. And that is a much more powerful position because you are voting as a representative of the entire state, not just a district. Okay, so I want to show you this district situation. Okay, so what happens is we divide the state into districts based on how many people they have. This is reapportioned every 10 years according to the census when we count how many people are here. So in the last census, California was decided that we should have 53 votes. Okay, that person, each of those people is going to represent a small district. So you can see the whole state is numbered, right? Here's District 1. It's like the Hunger Games. Okay, we are down in this area. Now you can see some of the districts are much larger, and these are so small, you can't even see the numbers on there. Okay, anybody got to guess why that is? That's right, because this is trees and this is people, right? So each district is supposed to be about the same size. That's a principle that we call one man, one vote. So we're trying to make sure that everybody has the same say, and you're represented by someone who is supposed to be very close to your needs. They're supposed to be attentive to your community and take those needs into Congress. So for example, your district, if you live in Downey, is District 40. This is your representative, Lucille Roybal Allard. And I actually live fairly close. I live in Whittier, but as I mentioned, California is so populous that we're not even in the same district. I'm 20 minutes from Downey and I'm in District 38. So this is my representative, Linda Sanchez. You get to reelect these people every 2 years. So if you are not happy with what Lucille Roybal Allard is doing in Congress to represent Downey, then you can get rid of her and get somebody else. Okay, senators. These are our California senators. Dianne Feinstein on the left has been elected since 1992. She's actually 87 years old. So this is what she has done with her life, represent California. And then you can see on the right, Kamala Harris was just elected in 2016. So she's not even through one full term yet. And she is currently running as Joe Biden's vice presidential candidate. So if he wins the election, then she will resign and we will choose someone else to be in the Senate because you can't hold both of those positions at the same time. Okay, so that was the Great Compromise. Second compromise is called the 3/5 compromise. And the other 2 compromises actually have to do with this slave state, free state argument. Okay, so in the 3/5 compromise, there are actually 2 questions that we're trying to resolve. The first question is, should enslaved people count for representation? Okay, so going back to the House, right? Remember, in the House, the more people you have in your state, the more people you get in the House. Okay, so the question is, do we count slaves? Like, should they count in the population? Okay, so let's think about this for a second. If I am in the South, do I want those slaves to count? And the answer should be yes, because that is going to give me more representation, right? It means that Texas has more people in it. Well, Texas isn't in this in the United States at this point, but Virginia, right? They have more people and therefore they get more representatives or more votes in the House. Okay, if you are in non-slave states, they're going to say no, right? Because they want to have more representation. Also, they're like, dude, that's your property. Like, that shouldn't count as a person if you're not going to treat them as a citizen. Okay, however, the second question for this is, should slaves be taxed as property? Okay, so this is kind of like if your parents own a home, they pay taxes on that home to the state. So the question is, should slaves be taxed as property? Okay, if I am a slave owning state, do I want to pay those taxes? Okay, our answer should be no, because most people do not want to pay more taxes than they have to. So slave states are going to say no, we should not tax slaves as property. Free states are going to say yes, we should, because that's money you have to pay that we don't have to pay. Okay, now I want you to notice these answers are reversed, right? So slave states say yes, count slaves as people for representation. no, don't pay taxes. Free states say, no, they shouldn't count for representation. Yes, you should have to pay taxes. Okay, so anyone got to guess what the 3/5 means? That's right. Slaves count as 3/5 of a person for both representation in Congress and for taxation purposes. Okay, so what that means is if I have enslaved 5 people, then 3 of them will count in the population, and I will pay taxes on the value of 3 of them. Okay, so that is the compromise that we come up with. And what this essentially does is it encodes in the Constitution that slaves are not on the same level as every other citizen in the country. And we're going to see that in other areas of the Constitution as well, where slaves are essentially counted as property. Okay, slave trade compromise is our last one. So again, this has to do with slavery. This compromise is a little bit more straightforward. The question is, should the slave trade be permitted? We're talking about the international slave trade. So if you look down in the right-hand corner, you can see this graphic that shows you where all of this international slave traffic is going. And although the United States form of slavery was particularly horrific, you can see we actually only got 5% of the slaves. Many enslaved people were exported to other countries. Brazil actually got a ton of them. You can see about 35% ended up in Brazil. Okay, so the question, though, that the country is wrestling with is, should we be allowed to import these enslaved people? And obviously, if I'm a slave state, what would I say? Yes. Okay, so the North, or the free states in the North, are going to say, no, we don't want this. And the South, or slave states, are going to say, yes, we do. And ultimately, anybody remember, are there more slave or free states? That's right, there's more with slaves. And so what they decide to do is we are going to keep it. So this is not a compromise where you can say, like, yes, we'll keep 3/5 of the slave trade, right? You have to decide, do you want it or you don't want it? They decide we will have it, but only for 20 years. And in 20 years, we'll decide if we're going to keep it. So you can see there's that little graphic of that guy kicking the can. This is what we call kicking the can down the road. We're like, hey, we can't actually fix this problem right now. Let's fix it in 20 years, which is why pushing this conflict is eventually going to lead us into a massive war called the Civil War that we will study later in the year. Okay, so this is the compromise. We'll keep it for 20 years and then vote on it. When they voted on it, they actually did decide to get rid of it. So the 20 years puts it at 1808. However, if you know your history, you know slavery didn't end until after the Civil War, which is 1865. So post 1808, slavery was allowed, just not the international slave trade. Okay, so here we go. Ratification. So ratification is a fancy word for pass. And once this document is written, we still have to get everybody on board with passing it. So according to the Constitution, you need 9 out of 13 states to ratify or pass the document. And they were actually having a hard time getting that many states on board. So this turns into a conflict between 2 groups, one of which is called the Federalists. And the Federalists are going to be very pro-Constitution. They want to ratify. You can see pictures of 3 of these guys in the bottom left. Hamilton, who has a famous musical produced about him, Madison, and John Jay. All 3 of these guys together wrote documents called the Federalist Papers, in which they argued for passage of the Constitution. And what the Federalists said is that the strong central government offered by the Constitution provided stability. Okay, so they're looking at Shays' Rebellion, going, look, that government was weak sauce. We need a stronger central government. We need to be able to put down rebellions and actually collect taxes and actually have an army. And that's going to create stability for the country. Okay, now I want you to think about why somebody might be afraid of instituting a strong central government like that. Somebody like Thomas Jefferson. Okay, so this other group that emerges is called the Anti-Federalists, very on the nose. And they are afraid of creating another strong central government. They wanted more states' rights. Okay, so can we look at this graphic in the middle? This King George hulked out. This is from the project that you're doing. So they're afraid that we're going to get another King George, right? They're like, we just got rid of him. And now you want another strong president. You want to let us be taxed. You want, right? They're scared of this new government. And so Thomas Jefferson actually argues against the Constitution, right? He's like, this is not going to be good. And in order to pass the Constitution, they had to strike a compromise, which is the document that you see on the right there. That's right, the Bill of Rights. So the Federalists agree to add the Bill of Rights to the Constitution later if the Anti-Federalists will ratify. The Bill of Rights is going to encode some of the most important freedoms that Americans cherish today, like your freedom of speech and religion and all of that stuff. They're going to add that later as a way to protect the people and the states from this strong central government that they have created, right? So the Bill of Rights tells you, nope, no soldiers in your homes. You can have a weapon, right? Have a musket, protect yourself from the government. So these are things that they're going to write in to try to help people feel more comforted in having a strong central government. Okay, so let's review. We mentioned that the Constitution was made up of a series of compromises between large states and small states and free and slave states. We talked about 3 of those compromises. The Great Compromise, which gave us the House of Reps and the Senate. House of Reps based on population, Senate based on equality for states. And then the other 2 related to slavery. The 3/5 Compromise, where we said slaves would be worth 3/5 of a person, both for representation and for taxing. And the Slave Trade Compromise, where we said we would allow the slave trade for 20 years, kicking that can down the road. Okay, this turns into an argument between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists over ratification. They're going to throw down over that. And eventually, these 2 groups will become the first 2 political parties, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. The Federalists eventually give the Anti-Federalists the Bill of Rights to convince them to ratify. If you are a note taker, you may want to take a picture of this slide. That would be a nice reference for you to have later. Thank you so much for coming to our online class. Have a great day, guys.